There were certain problems that, really emerged after 1989. One was, free market fundamentalism, this idea that everything was going to be open to the free market, globalization and financial flows, which didn't work for national economies, for industries. And so people rebelled against that economic order. And there was also a problem with military interventions. A lot of wars happened, on the Balkans, in Kosovo, in Iraq. And again, the people simply didn't support these forever wars that happened. And so there was a backlash against these extreme excesses and errors of liberalism that happened after the end of the Cold War. And liberalism was too arrogant, too hubristic to understand that people did not support that form of more extreme liberalism. This is part of the backlash against globalization. People want there to be a national economy that offers good jobs, that offers industry, that doesn't just offer free trade, which doesn't work for everyone in the country. The question is, will the state be controlling or will it be supporting people? So you can have a state that surveils you, that tries to influence your behavior. You can have a state that supports, that actually tries to create the common good. We don't really know which of those two models will prevail, but the state going forward will play a bigger role in the next 20, 30 years. Yeah. So there are forms of post-liberalism that are dangerous, those which are very nationalistic, those which are very protectionist, and those which basically think that our identities are fixed. It's about race or class or or one thing. But there is post-liberalism which is about the common good, which is about trying to reconcile the interests of workers and the interests of businesses, the interests of the young people and the older, a more relational politics, a politics built on intermediary institutions like trade unions, like professional associations, a plural state, a more ethical market. And so we need to encourage those forms of post-liberalism that actually try and reflect the things that people care about most: work, family, community, faith. And if that post-liberalism can be more influential, then I think we can build better alternatives to liberalism, but also to anti-liberalism, which is very dangerous.
So the cutting of aid internationally is really a big problem. It's not only the US, but many donors are cutting their funding. But let's focus on the US, as you asked me to. So the US accounts for a lot of bilateral aid. 28% of all bilateral aid from the Development Assistance Committee in the OECD is provided or was provided by the United States. So cutting this amount of funding is devastating. And it's in particular devastating for health aid, because the United States have traditionally provided a lot of health aid. So this means people will die. They will die because they don't get the antiretroviral drugs to combat HIV/AIDS infections. They will die of malaria and they will die of tuberculosis and other infectious diseases. So there are some first back-of-the-envelope calculations. These are not very reliable estimates, but about an additional 2 million people per year are likely to die because of the cut of US funding alone. So in the research sector, it's also been devastating, the cut of USAID funding. So as a development economist, I've been using the demographic and health surveys a lot. So this was a fantastic gift by the Americans to all social science researchers. So it was over 70 countries, several waves of detailed surveys that gave us a lot of information on demographics and health. And it's just been cut. You go to the website and it's down. Mineral resources are very important for the greening of the global economy. So if you're asking me whether we will see more conflict in Africa because of this demand, I think sadly I will have to say yes. So there are going to be a lot more localized conflicts around these rare earths. So rare earths are not that rare. It's in a way a misnomer. They're just too rare in many places to be successfully mined. But where they do exist, there will be more conflict around these mines. We know from current research that around these mines we have a lot of problems. So not only violence, but also then the sort of other developmental issues on infant mortality, for example, is much higher around these mines. So sadly, we will see a lot more problems, development problems, including conflict around these mines in Africa.
There's been a number of moments in the history of the relationship of the United States with Europe. You can even go back to the beginning of the NATO alliance in 1949. There's always been moments along the line where there have been crises in the transatlantic relationship. It happened in the 50s, it happened in the period of the Vietnam War, it happened under Reagan in the 1980s. Don't forget how unpopular Reagan was amongst many Europeans. And it happened under George W. Bush in the War on Terror. So we've been here before in terms of crisis. Is this fundamentally different? Is it fundamentally more of a challenge to the transatlantic relationship? I think it's more of a challenge. I don't think there's any doubt about that. In fact, all the previous presidents, you want Clinton, George W. Bush, go all the way back to Ronald Reagan, Eisenhower, all the way back to Truman, if you like, all of them believed in the transatlantic relationship as a fundamental prop of American power, not just of Europe. Trump seems to challenge that notion. And it's not even clear that he believes in it, that other countries can be allies, because an alliance assumes trust. An alliance goes beyond economics. And I think that from that point of view, it is very different. But I think in the end, and I may be wrong, I may be right, I think the fundamental interest in the United States will remain in Europe. However much he talks about tilting to China, tilting to Asia, moving out of Europe, it just is not either in the strategic interest, the economic interest, or indeed, it's not even in the American interest, because many Americans have a deep root within Europe. And although they may be fed up with Europe in many ways, we think the Europeans should be spending more on defence. I think there's still a fundamental relationship between the two continents. So in the short term, I'd be a bit pessimistic. Long term, I'd be more optimistic. We have a number of conflicts which are going on at the moment and have been going on a long time. One is in Europe, Russia and Ukraine. We have a increasing crisis in the Middle East. We've just seen US attacks on Iran. But we have a number of other wars in the world which are not talked about enough. Terrible civil war in Sudan, and other conflicts in other parts of the world, which we should always remember. So it isn't just those two wars, there are many others. And is it a new Cold War, though? It's quite a popular term, but it's not a term I like to use for two reasons. One, because if we think of it as a new Cold War, it kind of takes us back to a different era, when communism was significant, when the Soviet Union was significant, when Mao Zedong was the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, when it was communist in the fully authentic sense of Maoism. I don't think we're in that world any longer. The communist project, as it was once understood, is no longer with us, for good or bad. It's entirely up to people to make their own minds up about that. That's the first thing I'd say. I think also, secondly, we're talking about China in particular, because that's what people do talk about. Of course, with Russia, it's a hot war, isn't it, in Ukraine? But if it's a Cold War, there's too much connecting China and the wider world market for it to be thought of as a Cold War. The Soviet Union was not much connected to the world market, the world capitalist economy. China is. China's rise has been made in part possible by its relationship with the global capitalist economy, with the West, with the United States even. And it's not something they're about to give up. So there are two fundamental significances. If you want to sell a book, put the word New Cold War on it. But I think if you want a deeper analysis, I think you should try and avoid the term. That would be my view anyway.